Hi, I'm Jenny Ware with Wearhouse Creations, and if you're watching this, you're most likely a new potter looking for information. Get it? When my husband Bill and I were both brand new potters, we scoured the internet looking for any kind of video that would give us any information at all. I think we probably watched all of them. We even jokingly called it pottery porn and said that, I mean, that's what we did every waking moment of every day when we weren't at work. We would come home and we'd watch pottery videos. And now that we've decided to grow our business and create this YouTube channel, we'd like to give back. This video was made because I needed a little bit more detail with the basics. I needed it a little slower and a little closer, specifically about how hand-built seams would stick and what are the different ways you needed to do that. I've tried to include some helpful tips, tricks, anything that I could think of that would help you out. And if you like what you're seeing, please do the like and subscribe, and then put in the comments anything that you would like to see more of, or anything that you'd like to let us know here at Wearhouse Creations in Rome, Georgia. Let's go. Okay, here we go. Got a slab rolled out on the slab roller. I'm going to compress it. First of all, I'm going to show you this is a wooden rib. I'm not really a fan of that because I use it when I'm throwing, but not so much to compress a slab. The next one is the metal rib of death, which it's flexible. It's great for throwing. It's great for smoothing out things, but I don't really like it for compressing slabs either, so toss that one. Now this is my favorite tool. It is a Cheryl Mud Tools silicone rib. I have a description, or where you can find it in the description box. This is my absolute favorite because it does a little bit of everything. So this is just a key card from a hotel room to show you that you really don't need to spend a whole lot of money for tools, because all I did was use that metal rib and I cut it. I cut the key card to match that, and that way I have straight angles, I've got the curve, I've got everything. The card's flexible, so it works pretty much just like the metal rib, except it won't slice your fingers off. But I've got that angle, and I really like how that works. So I'm compressing the clay here. This is using the red rib, and I'm just smoothing it out. And you can see right there, this was reclaimed clay, so it's got a little bit of a swirl in it. But I'm just taking that rib and compressing the clay, getting the texture out of the thing. Now look how I've got my rib. I'm holding it at an angle because what you don't want to do is that. You don't want to put it down and just like rip holes in your clay. So just make sure that you're holding it at the correct angle so that you're not digging into your clay. I want to point out right here that this clay is extremely wet and floppy. Because it is so wet, we can use this wet clay to join two pieces together without really doing a whole lot. All I'm doing is I put them together and I'm just joining it with my fingers. While I'm talking about this, your fingers are your best tools out of everything else because you can do just so much with your fingers. It's the best way to be able to feel what you're doing with the clay. So I'll be using that red rib to kind of go over this again, but you'll see what happens when you don't clean it. You see those streaks? You just have to make sure you get all of the dried clay off of it so that when you do smooth out your clay, you don't have all of those scratches and things. Once you've compressed those seams down a little bit, you're pretty much done. And so what I'm trying to figure out is what to do with this little piece. I want to put a texture in it, so I'm using my cornstarch in the sock and then using this texture roller. I can't remember where I got it. Sorry, guys. But that's what the texture looks like. And it's a little piece, so what I decided to do was just make a tiny little bowl. Bisque mold using half of a styrofoam ball, which you see here, and just drape the clay over it. I covered it with plastic wrap, draped the clay over it, and then came up with that little bitty bowl, which has been a great thing to use. And since that clay is such a small amount, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to use this cutter, which I have a description in the box where you can find it. But I'm just going to use this 3.5-inch cookie cutter to cut out a little circle and use that circle to put it in the bisque mold. But you're going to see when I pick up this slab, remember I said it was really wet? You see what happens when you pick up a really wet slab? See all of that? I can fix that, but if I had waited until this were a little bit more leather hard, that would not have been a problem. So if you're really going to work on a piece that you need to make sure that it's in pretty good, pretty close to perfect, don't use really wet clay. Using this finishing sponge from Mud Tools, I'm just going around the edges and kind of just finishing that off and trying to make it a little bit more smooth. You would do this in pretty much every piece that you use. You just want to make sure that you don't use a whole lot of water because you don't want to introduce that back into your clay that you've just worked on. The next thing we're doing is making a cylinder, but you want to wrap it around something that is covered in plastic, otherwise it will stick like a crazy, crazy thing. Don't ask me how I know that, but I do. So you just wrap it around whatever you want it, depending on what the size you want, you just wrap it around there. Now please, I am not making something that's supposed to look great. This is just looking at seams, so please don't judge what I'm doing right now. But this cylinder, I just cut it through there, and you can see the parts that you don't need. They just come right off the outside, and then don't forget the little one that's under the inside there. You take that one off, and then pretty much doing the same thing that we just did, because this clay is so soft. We don't need to score and slip this because it is so soft. But I'm just compressing these edges down right here. If you're concerned, you can definitely smush that down so that it's not too thick, because remember, you've got two pieces that are coming together here, so you want to smooth them down as much as you can to make them kind of even. Again, cleaning off that Mud Tool rib, go ahead and smooth that seam down. The more you smooth it, the less likely you are going to have cracks and it's going to come apart. Then you can take out the inside. Using a little twist, you can get the plastic out pretty easily, but then just keep in mind the inside of that seam you're going to have to do some work on as well. This tool that you're about to see is one of my favorites. I don't think I could live without it. It is a Kemper, I think it's just a wooden modeling tool, and it is something that I use all the time. It is an extension of my finger, which is also actually your best tool. If you take your finger, which you'll see me here in just a second, you take your finger and you dip it into a little bit of water, and you can smooth out the inside of that. But just remember, now I used a little bit too much water here, but you don't want to introduce too much water to your project because it will turn into complete and total mush. Now, as I said, this cylinder looked pretty bad. So what I did was I went ahead and I cut off the really weird looking edges. Here is something that you need to remember. If you handle your clay this much, it is going to warp. So this was definitely not a video on how to handle clay. So this clay has set up a little bit. It's not quite leather hard, but it's not as floppy as it was before. It still bends. So we're going to make a cylinder out of this, but we're going to have to do something a little bit different. I'm going to cut these edges and bevel them so they fit together, not straight on like that, but I'm going to bevel them at an angle so that you can see how this works. This is a shim tool, beveling tool. It's got two different angles on it, and I'm going to be using, I don't know, I think that's a 45 degree angle. When you do this, you want to make sure that your thumb is down at the very bottom so that you don't rip off the bottom of your piece. And the way that I remember to do this is save that. That'll come in handy a little bit later. But you flip it straight over and do the other side that way. I always mess this up until I figured out you just flip it. It's just the easiest thing to do. But that'll give you two edges that are beveled that will go together. When you're bending clay like this, it's really important to remember you have to go very slow, otherwise you'll just crack the whole thing. If you do wind up seeing some little bitty cracks, there are some things that you can do for that. There are those cracks, and all you need to do is just use that best tool, your finger, and you can buff out some of those small stress cracks. Just remember, don't use a whole lot of water. Now to join these seams, we're going to need to score and slip. This tool is a serrated metal tool. You can use that. You can use your needle tool. There are so many different, you can use a fork. Remember I said you don't have to have expensive tools. But you just, whatever tool you use, you're going to do some seriously deep scratches. Don't just kind of look at it and make it a little bit. But you want some serious scratches, because what you do when you score and slip is that you open up that drier clay to the clay underneath, and you're going to use your finger, or I'm using water here because I want to show you what slip actually is. It's just liquid clay. But you see all those little pieces of drier clay? Once you add water to that, not this much water, Jenny, good grief. But when you add water to that, you're going to see that clay becomes slip. Basically, guys, it's mud. So this is me, I just have it in a ketchup bottle. Now sometimes it gets clogged, so I'm not even gonna try that. And this is really thick in here, but this is just my reclaim mix of slip. So I'm using my finger, and I'm just gonna put it all into that scored edge of the clay right there. I like to put it everywhere. I will go ahead and admit I am a very messy potter, so you're going to see this. So you're also going to see that my slip is a little bit different colored than my clay because this is reclaimed slip and clay. So I know that my slip and my clay are actually compatible with each other. If they weren't, like, you don't want to use a slip that has a different shrink rate than your other clay, but this slip works well. It just is a different color, as you can see. Now, one of the things that you want to make sure you do is when you're putting these seams together, go ahead and press relatively hard. You don't need to warp the clay, but you do want to press it so you can see that slip oozing out like you see here. And then you can wet it just a little bit and then use that rib. Come on, can't see it. Move it up. There you go. So you can see that I'm just using that rib to compress that seam like we did before when it was really, really wet. Only this time we've slipped and scored. So we're just going to continue to smooth out that seam. The one thing that I do in this video that I'm not real proud of is you don't want to move your clay around quite as much as I am. Now, yeah, I'm doing a pretty decent job of smoothing that out, but that right there, when you smush it like that, that's not good because it leads to warpage, and you really don't want to do that. One thing that I do is I put it on my little bottle. Now, I didn't coat it in plastic this time because I'm not using a whole lot of pressure. I am using a pony roller to smooth out that seam, but I used the pony roller with white clay before I used it with the brown clay. So you can see how that white clay gets on that brown clay, which is really not that big of a deal for me. But if I were using white clay and I had brown clay or red clay in it, that would be a huge bad thing for me. But you don't want to smooth it or smush it around quite so much because it will warp. So this is more of a case of do as I say and not as I do, I guess. There are ways that you can mitigate that, but if you don't do it in the first place, it is a better deal. Also, because this is more of a tutorial on the actual seam itself, I'm not paying a whole lot of attention to the top and the bottom right here. I should be. This is a place where it's very prone to crack if you don't handle this pretty well. So again, this is a do as I say, not as I do. Now we're going to do a right angled join. Remember I said to hold on to those little pieces after you've used the beveling tool? Now you don't have to use a bevel tool to do this. You can use a knife. Again, pottery is not something that you have to spend a whole lot of money on tools to do. I just happen to have this tool and I really like it. But after we've beveled all four sides, and you can see what I'm talking about here with this bevel, it's like doing a miter joint if you're working with wood. They fit together like that. But because this clay, you can see it's a whole lot harder than it was to begin with. But we need to make sure that we do the scoring and the slipping. And I'm pretty aggressively scoring this. You can see those dried bits are falling off. So it's an aggressive score this time because the clay is so much more dry. One of the beginner mistakes that I made was that I was afraid to really get in there and score my pieces, and they'll wind up falling apart if you don't get a good bond, because that slip, that mud or slip or liquid clay or whatever you want to call it, that's pretty much the glue. So I'm using one side with water and one side with slip just to show you the difference between the two. And this is going to be pretty ugly, but what I'm doing is just joining those two together, and you compress with your fingers. You're pushing, but see how my right hand is bending that slab? Don't do that. That's a bad thing. But I'm just showing you the joint there. You just compress that joint, and the slip should ooze out. You've got a lot of it. You can use your finger as a tool. Again, your finger is your best tool that you have. So is that silicone mud tool. And no, not sponsored, but I really, 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 really like mud tools. I think they have their whole product line has a lot of good stuff in it, but I digress. So just smoothing out the joint there, trying to make that seam the least amount of ugly as I can. Honestly, there's a whole lot of finishing that goes on with hand building beyond what you do in the initial stage. But this is something that it's not a necessary thing, but it's something if you wanted stronger joints, this is why I told you to hold on to those little bitty pieces, because you can use a coil to reinforce your joint. I'm just dipping it in water there. And because this is something that you've used as a bevel, it's already got a little angle that will fit right down in there in that corner, and it's the right size. So using your modeling tool or your wooden tool or whatever you have, put it in there and just join those clay parts together, making sure that it's all the way in the seam. You can use a sponge, you can use your finger, you can use a paintbrush, you can use whatever you need to get down in that seam. And there you have it. So it's almost like using a weld in a joint. Well, that's it. Thanks for watching. This is Jenny Ware for Wearhouse Creations. See you in the next video.